and welcome! In this video today, I will show you guys how I reconstructed an ancient Roman stola. Ever since I started taking Latin, which was about 6 years ago, I was always somebody who really enjoyed learning about the arts and the architecture and the culture of ancient Rome. However, as I started getting more into dress history and getting into more of Roman dress history, you start to see a pattern of lack of information in that field specifically, and most of the information you could really find online that boils down to men wore togas, women wore stolas. There was purple dye, and that was really, really, really expensive. And they dyed their white clothing by boiling urine of alcoholics and drunk people to give it that sheer, beautiful whiteness.
Fair and Lovely is now Glow and Lovely.
I'm not joking about that last bit, but that can't be all that there is, truly. I ended up doing a lot of research, and actually in the last 10 years or so, some really great research has come out about textile remnants and other reconstruction works from other dress historians about stolas and togas and tunics and tunicas, and that research became the basis of my reconstruction project. And as you know, information is always changing all the time, and records are being translated and more remnants are being found. Hello, editing me over here. So I took down part of this clip because I just went on a complete tangent about some research that I was doing about one thing or another, and it just wasn't really relevant to the video, so I just took it down. But basically in that part I was just summarizing or trying to emphasize how research is always changing and how information and new information comes to light, and that can disprove older theories and just older ideas, and bring about new theories based on that new information, and how research that I'm doing right now might not be as accurate in about 10 years due to new research that may or may not be coming up. Now, back to the video. Information is changing all the time, and my research might be completely debunked and be considered untrue in the next couple of years, and I just want to make that clear right now, just if future people are watching this and it's like, I already know my fabric choices are not the most accurate, but more on that anon. So for those who don't know much about the stola, here's just a very brief history about it. The stola first began to emerge around the 5th century BCE. It was mostly likely derived from a variation of Greek dress, as at this point the Roman Republic was expanding into most of Italy, and it was starting to get into many of the Greek provinces and colonies that existed at that time on the Italian peninsula. However, the term stola actually wasn't used until the 2nd century BC. It was only originally worn by married women of a patrician class or the very higher up classes, but after the Second Punic Wars, it started being worn by married women of all classes, making it the most popular garment between the 3rd century to the end of the Roman Republic, with the attempt to revitalize it in the age of Augustus for most Roman women. By the end of the Republic and beginning into the Empire, the stola was falling out of favor with most women, and by the Flavian dynasty, only the 300 wives of the senators were wearing them. After the 2nd century, they disappeared completely for the most part, and by the latter half of the 3rd century, the upper class of the Roman Empire adopted the dalamastic or dalmastia, which is an Eastern style of tunic, and you can still see dalamastias being worn by many priests and cardinals by priests and cardinal. To note quickly, before the 4th century BCE, both men and women wore togas, or an earlier version of it, which was derived from the Etruscan dress. Basically, the stola itself was a Roman Republican fashion, but even after it went out of fashion in the Empire, it was still a symbol of matrons and respectable married Roman women. You can still even see portraiture and statuary even after the 2nd century and the 1st century, where you see emperors, empresses, and dignified empresses are not wearing the stola, but empresses and dignified women of certain classes who were still depicted in wearing stolas because they were still considered a very matron and respectable garment. So the stola for me that I'm going to construct for today, it would have probably existed in the very late Republic or early on in the Empire. So around the 1st century BC to the time of Christ's crucifixion is where this stola could have hypothetically existed. Fabric-wise, I'm using a very lightweight chiffon. Most fabrics at this time were plain woven and lightweight to adapt to the Italian climate because Italy is in the Mediterranean and it gets very hot, so lighter weight fabrics are more suitable for that weather. Silk at this time, which is what the chiffon is made of, was quite rare in ancient Rome, but you do see a lot of writings by Roman men complaining a lot about women's fashion and women's clothing, especially when they're talking about sheer silks. And we can see a quote from Seneca the Elder over here, and which he goes on a tangent about women wearing sheer silks. Yeah, nothing has really changed since the Roman Republic. If you know what I mean. All my dress historians, you know what I mean. Usually silks were woven with other materials like wool and linen to make it less sheer and a little bit more pragmatic and a little bit less expensive because silk was worth its weight in gold at this time. But for me to find a modern equivalent of that or something just close to that was either too expensive, doesn't really exist at all. So the silk chiffon, which I actually got at a really good price, was my only option and probably one of my best ones. For linens, I couldn't really find a very sheer linen because it does not seem to be done as it used to be anymore, or like woven as it used to be at that point. And wool, there were a couple of good options around here and there of like wool gauzes and leno weevils, I think that's what you call them, but there was something that I really liked and they would tend to be actually really pricey, so the silk option was the one I ended up going with. I'm also using wool yarn to make the straps of the stola and some of the ties, and I'm using a silk taffeta for the instantia, which is just the hem of the actual stola, but I'll get onto that more in the video. Let's get started. Now that we have gotten through the first circle of hell of pinning chiffon, now it's time to cross the second circle of this stola inferno. Sewing the seams. At the beginning of this process, I tried sewing it with back stitching, but it kept on pulling and creating huge holes into the fabric, so I switched to a running back stitch, which looked better and made it easier to sew, even though this fabric is chiffon. The girls that get it. The girls that don't. My sewing line was extremely uneven, but there was no chance in hell I was attempting to mark a sewing line on this crap show of a fabric. The seams are stitched up until the armhole openings on either side. Note, most historians believe that the stola was made out of one piece of fabric. However, I believe that this could have been done with two pieces, because if you look at the sleeve openings on stola statues, they can go up to the clasp with no bunching at the armpit holes that can only be achieved with slits for the armholes. The front piece was 3 yards long, and the back piece is 2 yards long. After sewing up both sides, I realized that there was a twist in the fabric, so it wasn't a tube anymore and more like a Mobus band. And since there was no chance in hell I was gonna seam rip that, I just cut the seam out and re-sewed it. Was it the smartest decision? No. Was it better for my mental health? Yes. After sewing up both sides, I started to finish up the raw edges. Raw edges on seams is something that the Romans didn't have to deal with, as most of the time they only wove an amount of fabric for just one garment, or wove the shape of the garment onto the loom itself, then sewed together. They did this on a warp-weighted loom, which allowed them to do stuff like this. It was only until the 10th century when cutting and sewing clothes out of bolts became more common. However, the Romans still had to deal with raw edges, as piecing is period. Some extant garments show raw edges being whipped down, so that's what I replicated. There are multiple extant garments that show Romans taking pieces of embroidered parts of the fabric and just stitching them onto different places. So some of the extant garments that I've seen show that the raw edge is being whipped down, so that's what I tried to replicate. I ended up doing a twisted whip type sort of thing. I feel like if I was just to whip the raw edges like so, you wouldn't do anything to stop the fraying. Hand-woven fabrics tend to be sturdier than our modern ones, so the Romans didn't have a big issue or as a big issue with raw edges as I did. But one of my main questions is how they sew such fine fabrics if their needles looked more like this. The needle that I have is a standard size 10 needle, but extant Roman needles seem to be thicker than our modern day ones, so I don't really know how they would have been able to sew with them. Maybe they did have thinner needles and we haven't found them yet.
Months later.
And just updating you guys. So I told you guys I'm going with this taffeta. Not sure if silk taffeta would be the best option for a very sheer silk like this, but we're going with it because I have nothing else to do. And also the other fabric that I could use that is a bit more droopy and drapey and stuff is completely inaccurate. Not that taffeta is even as accurate, but it's a plain weave fabric and we have evidence for plain weave fabric, so you can assume that something similar like this may or may not have existed at this point at one point or another, but you can't, there's not that much but you can debate about it if you want or not. But we're just using this to mimic the not trim, but like the face, not facing or trim, but like more like the piece that goes onto the hem of this hem of the stola. Traditionally, they were just woven in when you were just making the fabric. You would just weave in like a a different weight of fabric, or not a different weight, a different material, a different style of weaving, maybe some tapestry weaving at the hem, put thicker threads at the bottom to give it like a little bit more not but like a little bit more thickness and more dimension. There are some really good like cool images and of like extant fabrics that look like that. But you know, tablet weaving was the thing. People tablet weaved and made trims for dresses and stuff like that, and they made belts also. I am just doing it like this because this just seems to be the simplest solution for now. I could hypothetically also just dye 3 inches of it, which would be arguably the easiest option, but I do like this like really nice like thick gold taffeta, which I think will look really nice. For the institia, or band on the stola, I'm using a golden silk taffeta. Many institiae on stolae would have been either dyed or woven onto the fabric to create this design. But since this fabric is already woven and my experience in dyeing fabrics was making dyed shirts, back in 5th grade, I decided to go with this option. The fabric is measured and cut into 4-inch wide strips with half-inch seam allowances included on the straight grain. These will be turned into 3-inch wide ribbons. Hey everyone, so I just finished cutting out all the strips of silk taffeta. I think I probably have more than about 280 inches cut, which is way more than it's needed for 5 meters, but I wasn't really paying attention to how much I was cutting, and I thought that I might have needed to cut out all the silk, but I really didn't need to do that. I didn't realize how many strips I really did need. I didn't realize how many strips I really needed until just now. And I'm just like, wow, I could have really just saved myself a lot of trouble by just cutting out not as many strips, but here we are. So anyway, I just got all these strips out, and the raw edges on all sides. And the next thing to do now is to just stitch all the strips together. I don't need to really finish any seams here. There's no really need to finish any seams, but stitch all strips together and then iron them, iron the seam allowance down, and then just stitch it onto the hem, and that would complete the decoration at the bottom. It's a very stiff fabric. And taffeta is a very stiff fabric, so I'm hoping it'll work well with the very, 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 very lightweight chiffon, but I have hope for it. Taffeta's not very heavy. This is not a very heavy fabric, so it should be fine, but we'll see. I might also treat this less as like a facing for the hem and more like a just an addition or an add-on, just to add like maybe an extra, this is 4 inches wide, an extra like 3-ish inches on the bottom, but we'll see. My only main concern is that like this silk is very, very heavy. It can take stitches very well. The other silk can't. That chiffon does not like taking stitches that well. So my biggest concern is that the chiffon will rip through the weight of the stitching, but I will try to do it as very lightly and as very minimally as I can possibly can. Anyway, that's my update for now. After spending a lot of time and energy measuring and cutting out the ribbons carefully, I pulled out my caricatures and used a pencil to measure my seam allowance to sew my strips together. The strips are then sewn together side to side, then the edges are ironed down. I then whipped the edge of the insitii onto the hem of the stola, which took about 2 days. Then spent the next 10 days stitching the other side to the chiffon. Contemporary portraiture depicting stolas prior to 40 AD show that they were belted at the waist and the underbust. These beltings could have been made out of tablet woven ribbons or some sort of rope that had some tassels at the end. I decided to go with the rope because tablet weaving would have been a bit too much time consuming and also something I do not want to learn right now because there's a million other things going on in my life and that would just be the simplest thing to do. Anyway, for the tassel tie thingies, I used Bernadette Banner's agate lace tutorial to make it. It's probably not the most accurate thing to do, as agate lace is something that that came around during the medieval era, but it's the best thing I could think of at the time, and it also seems to mimic the cording the best. Yeah, this was not the best idea to weave it on. I didn't really have a flagpole I could really tie it onto, so I just did it like this. It came out a couple of times and it ended up screwing a little bit of my tension on this, but it turned out in the end somewhat okay. I also made another one just by braiding it, which produced a much thinner cording. And I also tried making some straps for the stola via the aglet lace method, and they turned out not looking that great. So I will not be using them for this project, but I will probably use this 3-strand method to make new straps for it. Overall, I really do like the aglet lace cording for the belting. I think it came out looking really great and looking really nice, and I think it will work really well for this.
3,000 years later.
Well, how are you gonna send me the
YouTube?
footage?
Oh, oh wait, yeah, I can do it.
Can you send me the footage?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Alrighty. So
Wait, okay, here we go.
I'll show you. I'll tell you what we need to do.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just gonna YouTube.
Go ahead. Sorry.
You're just gonna tie it around the waist, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there, YouTube. So do you mind just coming closer? My friend is recording this. So I just got half of the strap thing done. It's a bit too long. It's actually quite too long, but for the final project, I'll probably just knot it over here, and then that'll be great. There still is some issues with it, but I'm not really worrying about it. I got the insistia finished, and now that's all done. I have to go through and repair it, but that's its whole thing. So now we have to tackle the right side of it. So it's basically the same process. We're just gonna add running stitches throughout. Here, let me just untie it. All right. So I don't know if you can see this, but we have a ton of this material here that just all needs to get running stitched and then gathered together and then put here, and then and then these will just be attached onto here, and then same thing on the other side. This bit will just get running stitched and gathered. This bit will just get running stitched and gathered and put onto here, and then same attachment on the other side. So that's what we're gonna do. Alrighty, let's get started. For the straps, I braided 3 strands of wool into a plait, tying them at the ends, then attached them to the aglets. Aglets were used in Roman clothing mainly in shoemaking. However, I do believe that they could have been used in extant clothing because, as you can see at the edges of the stolas where they meet the straps, it is very plain compared to the texturing of the actual fabric. So I'm hypothesizing that an aglet or something similar, like a metal bead or like something similar to the modern equivalent bead cap, could have been used at the point of the aglet to hold them together and to protect that the folded areas of the fabric. The fabric is gathered at all forward sides and attached to the aglets. rather poorly, in my opinion, because at this point I realized that I used actually too much fabric in each of the gathering areas, and I should have only used about 4 meters instead of 5, because the pleating, because the amount of pleating that needed to fit into the aglet couldn't work, and it ended up falling out a couple of times, and part of the fabric ended up getting damaged. And with the last strap being sewn on, the stola is finally completed. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you learned something. A reveal video will come out soon, but till then, please enjoy these photos taken by my friend Kat Sheridan, with the dress being modeled by Anabel Makover. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!